Intro. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Couch Coffee Culture. My name is Dr. Medill, and I'm the Audience Experience Coordinator for the ASU Art Museum. We do Couch Coffee Culture the last Sunday of every month, and it's a way for us to dive in deeper and get to know the artists we're working with a bit better. So today we're joined with ASU Art Museum Curator Brittany Corrales and artist Vicky, Isley, and Paul Smith, better known as Boredom Research. And they are going to take us on a journey, y'all. I hope you're ready. And with that, I'm going to just briefly go over how this is going to go today. So we're having an informal chat with the artist and the museum staff member. You will be muted during this time, but please feel free to add your questions in the chat. Brittany will have an eye on the chat. I'll make sure she gets the questions. And then at the end, we'll have a bit of a group Q&A if there's time. And as always, feel free to brunch as we're chatting. I know we all probably know Zoom at this point, but briefly, your chat function is at the bottom of your screen. It's circled in red here. You can see on the right-hand part of the screen when it says to everyone, that means everyone can see what you're typing. So if you happen to have friends on this Zoom and you want to send a secret message, make sure it's just their name. Otherwise, we're all going to see what you're saying. And then to mute and unmute yourself, it's the left-hand corner of your screen. A red line through the microphone means we can't hear you. And when there is not a red line, that means we can hear you. All right, Brittany, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kat. This Couch Coffee Culture series is just one in a year-long series of new interventions that we're calling pilot projects, which really emerged from our ability as a university art museum to be adaptive and experimental and find new ways for us to engage with our audiences and our artists during this time, during the pandemic. So I've had the pleasure of working with Paul and Vicky remotely this past year to help bring their exhibition Restless Balance to the ASU Art Museum, including the premiere of a new artwork, In Search of Chemozoa, that was the direct result of a residency that they did in collaboration with ASU's Biodesign Institute, in particular their Arizona Cancer Evolution Center. And they were inspired by the work of the scientists who were researching cancer across species. So for any of you who have joined us who are not familiar with Boredom Research's work, they're really interested in the mechanics of the natural world and the delicate balance that holds it all together. And they do this through really interesting new technologies, computational technologies, gaming software, all sorts of things. So they'll talk all about this today. But I just wanted to thank you, Paul and Vicky, for joining us today.
No problem.
You're very welcome.
So I want to start off, what are you drinking this morning? And I say this morning, but it's actually evening because you're joining us from the UK.
Yeah, it's just gone past 5 p.m. So yeah, this is very British. I was going to make like green tea this morning because we don't generally have caffeine after 1 o'clock, but you were keen to have like English tea. So we are drinking proper British English tea. Well, it's PG tips.
Yeah. Which, because I was hoping that we would have the advanced kind of tea bag technology, because they have a pyramid-shaped tea bag, which allegedly improves the flavor fluidity dynamics. And but I've just learned that you already have those. So
I told Vicky and Paul, unfortunately, that Lipton has discovered this technology in the US.
But it's a good cup of tea, yeah, and they're biodegradable tea bags now because we put them on our compost. So, and I used to split tea bags. If we had tea bags, sometimes we have loose tea, but if we had tea bags, I used to always take the tea out and put it in the compost. But it's much easier just that you can throw the bag in now as well. So
Well, I hope we're not stereotyping you by asking about your tea. But over here in the US, I'm drinking some local coffee, Xanadu coffee from right here in Phoenix. So really delicious. Of course, I leaned right into this coffee right at first thing in the morning. So what do you typically do on Sundays? I know we're catching you on a Sunday, so it's not a typical weekday when we're chatting.
Yeah, I mean, recently we've been working a lot because we've been doing workshops first thing on a Monday morning for the last 6 weeks or something. But today we actually had a proper Sunday, didn't we?
So spring has sprung. It's like this weekend has been the first weekend this year that we've had blue skies, bright sun. So we've been out. We've had our legal 1 hour of exercise walking in the forest, and we've been in the garden sowing.
So sowing seeds. I transplanted some lettuce, so because we've got a little veggie patch in our garden, and we're a bit early really to be sowing stuff.
It's just the excitement.
We're really eager to get something growing. So I've been transplanting the lettuces, and you sowed some broccoli, purple sprouting broccoli seeds. Yeah.
We were talking earlier this week about how our landscapes couldn't be more different here in Phoenix versus where you're at now. So I'm trying to transport myself mentally to the lovely environment where you're at, although it's really quite sunny always here.
We've had a huge amount of rain though here. So like Paul said, it's just started to pick up the weather. So where we live in the forest, it's a lot of it is heathland, but the soil is like really thin, the layer of soil, and if you have a lot of rain, it can get quite boggy.
I mean, it's one of those. It's the reason because we live next to what in England is quite a large area of naturalish forest, and one of the reasons why it's there is because the soil is so poor that it was one of the few places that couldn't be turned over to agriculture. That in the Second World War, when we were kind of cut off, any piece of land that could be kind of turned over to agriculture was kind of turned over, literally, and most of it never went back. So there's very kind of few places where there's any kind of natural or semi-natural landscape, and they generally tend to be places where the soil is really poor, and in the forest it's mainly kind of an issue of drainage. So over this time of the year it's really boggy.
The soil is actually quite acidic, so in our garden we have to lime the soil if we want it more alkaline. So but you get some quite interesting plants with very acidic soil as well. So sorry, it's like gardening time, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting. I like to talk to you because to me, a lot of the times when we've had conversations, I almost forget that you're artists, and I start to think of you both as scientists, because you're culinary scientists and artists, and you're working in the garden, and you're explaining these just incredibly complex processes, and it's fascinating. And I'm curious if you have an early childhood memory, or the earliest you can think of, that really influenced this career choice, and how you became interested in this intersection between art and science.
We've probably got two very different stories, haven't we? In that, like, I was thinking about it in the shower this morning. I was thinking, because it's that kind of, pinnacle moment. And I couldn't think of like a pinnacle moment, but my parents, when they used to go to school, like when you were invited like to parents' evening or whatever, apparently this is when I was very young, they would go in the art room and they would look for the worst drawing. And apparently that was mine. And I thought I was absolutely brilliant, you know, and I think what it was like I was ahead of my time because like I was really into like, you know, when you got like a still life fruit bowl or whatever, and I would be like, stuff that, I don't want to do this, the still life. I'm going to put some paper on the floor and I'm going to dribble paint on it. And I was like really into Jackson Pollock and stuff like that. So it was about making a mess. And I think my parents would just be like, that doesn't look like an apple. Like, but yeah, I think you were kind of like more into photoreal sort of stuff early on, wasn't you?
Yeah. I would think that I suppose I shouldn't should I be revealing that you sent us some questions to kind of pre-warn us? Because when you sent the questions through, it was that it was I was starting to think, you know, was there a moment that that was quite a significant moment quite early on? And I had this memory of seeing a documentary, and I'm pretty sure it was a kind of when Hockney was invited to the premiere of Adobe Photoshop or something, and was using that software. And I can remember that it was the first time I'd seen anything like that, and it was a really kind of just a moment where, you know, I kind of was very kind of conscious of the fact that I had my whole life ahead of me, and that I thought in the vastness of that available time, if only there was just this one day in the whole of my life that I would have access to a kind of a tool like that.
And now you're trying to get away from the screen all the time because we spend like too much time at the screen. So,
but I was thinking, I mean, we don't use Photoshop. We use kind of, I suppose, an open source kind of a piece of software called GIMP, which you could think of as its poorer cousin. And generally in the pipeline, it's sort of that point where you just have to do some kind of dog work, you know, something that's really kind of, I sort of had this realization that this thing that was potentially a kind of a driving force, that, you know, the kind of allure of technology and this kind of exciting, the promise of this exciting tool that was now kind of almost like, I don't know, if you're cooking and maybe, you know, you're kind of transferring some sauce and you spill some sauce on the floor and you have to get a floor cloth to
not a dishcloth,
a floor cloth to wipe the floor, and it's just that thing that you have to do. That Photoshop was now kind of had a similar kind of status now. It's just this thing that you kind of, you know, when you have some kind of not very exciting task.
But when we were fine art students, we used to go in the graphic media lab. This is when we first started using digital tools. And we did use Photoshop to start off with. So that was like, you know, like a dream come true for you.
We wasn't allowed in there. We had to sneak in. We had to sneak in and kind of just find a quiet terminal in the corner and hide there. And
because we were the wacky, like kind of fine artists, and it was like, you're not allowed in this lab. You know,
you might break something.
Well, that's funny you mention all of these gadgets, because I see behind you all of these gadgets and toys and technology. And can you tell us a little bit about the history of where you're working right now, how you started creating there, how it functions as a workplace and home for you, and how you've navigated that through the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose our whole home has been a studio for quite some time. We've been here for 18 years. So to the point that when people visit our home, they go, you know, aren't you tired of living with art all the time? So we've kind of got used to that.
Officially, this is the only room in our house that we technically refer to as the studio, although it does quite
it
often
spreads out,
spill out. And even there's been times where our son has been, like when he was going to school and we needed a little bit of extra space, that we'd kind of like be moving stuff into his room to use, you know, to kind of exploit that space when.
But this is where we've got all our computer kit. So because we keep it all in one room. So and since we've been working on chemozoa, we've kind of because it was funded through the Arts Council, we acquired quite a lot of camera kit to do that project. So we're using our Canon EOS as a webcam at the moment, which is really nice, and we can zoom in to all the kit.
Can you show us? Can you show us something new that you're working on?
Do you want to see it?
We've been. I suppose we should say a little bit about project, maybe.
Yeah, because this is a new project that we're working on. So it's part of. We're working with some scientists at Oxford University. And they're all working on a program which is called the Human Cell Atlas. And basically they're mapping, well, the aim of the project is to map all 37 trillion cells in the body. But that's an estimate because they don't quite know how many cells there are in the body. And that's part of the research that will go into this project. And they're using single cell sequencing to do that. So they're looking at cells on a cell by cell state and cell neighborhoods as well. So,
but we've been really kind of taken with the sort of work, the research of one scientist who's been trying to understand sort of the disease in the immune system. So the cells that he's interested in are the cells of the immune system, and things like cytokine storms, which I suppose more people are familiar with kind of COVID. It's when the immune system kind of overreacts, but also it's part of things like diabetes or other kind of similar diseases. And we had some really interesting conversations where he was talking about extinctions in the microbiome. So like that, you know, a big part of who we are aren't the cells from which we're made, but the kind of cells of other organisms living inside of us, and that relationship between, you know, us as kind of beings and the cells that are the other kind of microorganisms that we need to survive. But we've been kind of working on a project that uses the forest as a kind of a space to imagine this the kind of space of an immune system, and to create a storm in the forest, but not a storm as in kind of wind, but the storm as in a cytokine storm. I didn't know whether it was going to zoom in and just show.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We have 3 cameras in this room. We're all set up, in theory.
Yeah.
So I can just switch back to our Canon, which I'm really close now.
So as part of that, we're going to be like trying to film the forest, but in and we want to have a section of the film where we're kind of filming the forest in miniature. So we're
setting up these little.
We have a little kind of film set, you know, kind of a tiny film set.
So we've been gathering kind of like, we're focused over here. So we've been gathering like bark with kind of lichen and things on it, which is really probably very rare for you guys to see things like that. Because it really
are you gathering it from sort of the areas outside of where you live?
Yeah, which is really nice because we don't often, we haven't done many projects on the forest where we live. So it's really nice to kind of be incorporating it. And then we've got like kind of moss and things like that.
This is very foreign to us. It looks alien.
So yeah, and we're really excited about doing these like kind of miniature landscapes.
Really excited because I'm just going to switch the camera over now. So I just unplug this, can't I? So we've got this vintage lens. It's a Russian lens that's kind of, it's got a bit of cult status because it has this amazing bokeh effect.
So the lens that we've got is like it was made in the 70s. I think it's like 73 or something like that. And it's really nice because it has this like the focus point is really shallow, and then everything around it has kind of like got a bouquet around, like bokeh, I think you call it, which is like all the light spots kind of thing.
I don't know how much battery we've got left on here, so.
So let me.
Actually, is that the battery pack for the camera or the? I think I've got to change the battery on the camera.
Okay. So whilst Paul's setting that up, I might show you the software. Are you nearly done?
Can you just take the?
This is live. So we gather a lot of material when we go walking, and things that look like kind of, because we're really into Japanese art as well, and like stone gardens, like Zen gardens and stuff. So we gather stuff that
So you should be.
often is quite interesting, like that, which to me looks like a mountain, but it's just a stump of wood, you know. So I think we might be using that in the film as well, because it's really like when you use this lens with this piece of wood, it looks like a tilt shift lens. So it kind of like this actually looks like a mountain, which is really beautiful.
Oh, that's it.
What was the name of that lens?
So it's a Helios.
A Helios, yeah. Paul's dad is really into photography. And so often he gets these like vintage lenses and we're like, oh, can we have that? But yeah, it was one that he didn't want anymore. So we acquired it from Paul's dad.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that battery came up dead as well. Okay, so if you switch over.
Okay.
So
try switching over so you can see.
There we go.
Hopefully. Look, there you go. So that is the lichen. We actually gathered that yesterday. And yeah, and it's on a Lazy Susan, which you can use for lots of purposes. People use like turntables for like animation and things like that. We use this turntable to take the photographs of the rock for the chemozoa project. But we thought it'd be really nice to have. So Paul's made this slider, which he can rotate really slowly. So he can zoom into this landscape really slowly. And then you've got it rotating at the same time, which is really nice.
Great. Okay. But yeah, so we're trying to kind of work out how to kind of get the right settings to get a really nice sort of magical landscape, and then because we're going to be kind of having lots of transitions with kind of sweeping lights. So
so a lot of this has been filmed. The forest that we've been filming has been. I'm going to switch over. The forest that we've been filming near where we live. We've been filming it at night time, which is quite challenging. Especially when you're in the middle of a bog and you're trying to film it, and with sweeping lights as well, because we want it to look like a searchlight in the forest. And so yeah, the idea is that we make a transition from the mini landscapes into the body. So in CG we'll be modeling some cells, and then we almost want it like where you're not. There's some ambiguity there that you're not quite sure whether you're looking at the forest or veins or roots in the forest, or whether you're looking at some vascular kind of body network. So that this kind of transition between body and something that's quite natural as well.
There's something that's so interesting that you say that, because there's something that I'm always disoriented by in your work, which is I'm not sure if I'm looking at a micro or a macro scene, and it sort of sometimes shifts as I look at it. And so it's interesting that's that's happening there, because you can kind of see, are you looking at veins within a human body, or is it a natural sort of forest scene? It's a little bit ambiguous.
I think what would be really interesting, we actually have the rock that we used in the chemozoa film.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we managed to find it because we were really worried for a moment. We thought we'd lost it because we have lots of rocks in our garden as well. And I thought it ended up in the garden or something. But yeah, we managed to find it. It was being used as a paperweight.
It wasn't being used as a weight, it was we used it as a counterweight in a kind of a, you know, when you have a light on a boom. Yeah, so kind of like its kind of fall from stardom was quite severe. Let's see if, well.
I think we have to focus.
Yeah, here we go.
Oh, there it is. Oh, wow.
So that is, there we go. So
you get a sense of scale.
I can kind of almost recreate the kind of rotating rock. So somewhere, let's see, am I holding this the right way around?
Yeah. It's got a flat base.
All right, so it's here. So like in the chemozoa film, there's this kind of shot in the film where the camera kind of transitions. Oh, we've gone out. It's all right, it just needs to find the focus. The camera kind of like, first of all, there's a shot where it kind of, if my finger's the kind of direction the camera's pointing in, it kind of just appears over the edge here. And then we switch to a camera which can kind of traverses down into this kind of vast kind of canyon, and it seems like an epic sort of mounting, but it's really kind of a space no bigger than my my fingernail, and I suppose that's because I mean we took lots of photographs of the rock
so
and
we
rebuilt
used,
the rock in 3D
photogrammetry. So literally that turntable that you saw, we had the mountain, the rock. You can tell we get very immersed in our own little worlds, and we took like 360 images all the way around, and then restitched them to create the rock in the film.
But also, it means that the cameras that we use in CG are kind of virtual cameras, so that we can actually scale the rock up and have a camera with a certain kind of focal length that makes the rock, you know, the tiny rock seem like a vast kind of mountainous landscape. So that's so you know you're kind of right to be confused because we're.
I appreciate you bringing it back from its life as a paperweight to give it the starring role it deserved. Well, I'm curious that obviously you take inspiration from a lot of things, from science, from the natural world, from other artists. Can you talk about some of the things, the people, artists that are inspiring you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of our biggest, and I can't believe that I hadn't come across his work until really recently. I've been reading a lot more during the pandemic, and I came across David Abram, his name. He's an ecologist. He lives in the States, but also he's a philosopher as well. And I've been listening to the podcast called Emergence Magazine, and someone recommended me to, another fellow artist recommended me to listen into this podcast. And the whole Emergence magazine is on ecology and culture, but also sustainability as well. And then so I came across the interview with David Abram, and I was just in total awe of his work. He not only talks so poetically, it's almost like listening to a poet when he speaks, but he has such a he's so in tune with nature, so a lot of his philosophy is about listening to nature, and just stopping and giving nature that time to breathe. And he's been very inspired by different cultures and spirituality in those cultures as well, that he talks about in regards to how like medicine men, like shaman and things like that, and how they're using plants and the importance of that biodiversity as well. And it was something that just really resonated with our work. So since then we've read quite a lot of his material.
I think there's something about the way that he kind of talks about things that is really quite rich in the way that it's not scientific language, but it kind of relates to what I find, and I think this is my kind of own personal way that I respond to it, that it kind of very much relates to the way that I interpret the information that I get from scientists. That, you know, when we're kind of collaborating with a scientist, there's a lot of kind of very technical and mechanical ways that they kind of discuss the kind of systems or the behaviors or the kind of the entities that they're interested in, and we have to sort of find a way that we can engage with that. And it's I think that the thing that we're really trying to dig down into is the spirit that kind of motivates them to invest all this kind of time and energy in the kind of in the situations or the problems or the ways of thinking that they do. And I feel that the way that he talks about things really kind of helps in bridging that gap. For me, that's...
Yeah, so I'm about halfway through his book, which is really quite old now. I think he wrote it in 96, but it's called The Spell of the Sensuous. And it's an amazing book because it's about perception and how we view things. And he brings a lot of different philosophers' voices into that as well. And then the other person that I recently read their book, is a forester. He's called Peter Vollenben. I think I've pronounced his name right. And he's a German kind of ecologist, but also a forester as well. And he wrote this book called The Hidden Life of Trees. And it's just an amazing book. I got it from the library and I have to purchase it. It has to sit on our shelf because already I want to kind of quote him in quite a lot of projects. But he talks about how trees communicate to each other and how they signal as well. So through phenocides, they use chemical signaling and things like that. And it's been really inspirational, hasn't it? Because like even when we just go walking, it gives you a different perception of the trees, and you start to think about the clustering of the trees and which ones are healthy and why they're healthy. And he goes into things like when you have like a tree stump that might be really, really old, but it's still being kept alive by its community because that tree stump may have memories that the other kind of trees feed off, which is really interesting, isn't it? So we've been bringing a bit of Abram's work and Vollenben's kind of philosophy into this current project that we're working on.
Yeah, I think they've been quite important for the way that we're thinking about things.
And then like also one of the scientists that you mentioned earlier, Martin Pakowski.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because he's a scientist. I mean, he's there's kind of certain scientists that that we'll kind of talk to and we'll kind of express our way, in our own terms, a way of thinking about things, and they'll kind of point out the inaccuracies. Okay, that's okay. There's a degree of what you're saying that has some, but this is wrong, that's wrong, that, and it's that very kind of clinical dissection. And he was very, when we kind of shared some of our ideas with him, he was very kind of he kind of said, he was talking about the kind of intuitions, and I think that those are the sorts of scientists that we really engage with, the ones that they're very kind of equipped and competent and capable with the mechanical processes of science and the methodology of science, but yet that's sort of underpinned by some quite powerful intuitions and just ways of thinking about things that are rich and valuable and that kind of mean something, mean something to them that can help them kind of think and imagine their way through science. And I think it's that kind of bridge, I think, that kind of really helps us kind of join those two very kind of separate spaces together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so Martin is based at Oxford, so we're working with him on the current project, and we recently interviewed him about microbe extinction, which is really fascinating, and because he was talking about that we don't eat food so much that are seasonal. And with that, we're sort of not, there's actually microbes that are going extinct because we're not like eating a diet like we were foraging anymore. So it's kind of changing the microbes in our body. So we get like mucus defending microbes now.
Yeah. But one of the things that he was talking about,
really fascinating.
That kind of that change to our microbiome has sort of brought about. So if you imagine a forest where things can hide, in a forest is a really complex space and there's a big evolutionary process and things can hide and lurk in that space. But if we take the forest away, then suddenly they stand out, they can be seen very clearly. And the changes that we've made to our microbiome through changing the way that we eat have kind of created a similar thing, but from the perspective of the immune system, where the immune system suddenly has a changed situation. So things that it couldn't see before, it can see, and it responds to them very differently, and it creates these very different responses. And those sort of relate to things like diabetes, where kind of insulin is something where the immune system gets confused between do I consider this as part of the body, or is it kind of part of something separate? But yeah, so he's been really kind of
and then going back to someone that we've been inspired by pretty much from the start of when we started to create systems and virtual creatures is Ernst Haeckel. So this is a book that we consult quite a lot, Art Forms in Nature, and it's got like amazing plates. So he was like a German biologist, but also he did illustrations as well. And they're really, really detailed. And when I've shown my students these books before, they don't actually believe that they're real, the creatures, but they're all studies based on real life. And so, like when we're looking for forms or like virtual kind of creatures, we sometimes look at this book, don't we, for inspiration.
Well, I love that all these things that you've pulled in as your inspirations, because I see them also resonating in Search of Chemozoa, being a bridge and really illustrating in this really poetic, moving way these cancer cells. And, you've created this fictional organism, but it sort of takes on a sentient personality as you watch it in the video, and you're sort of rooting for it to survive, or you're invested in its future. You want to see what happens to it. And what's interesting that you're looking at sort of the sentience and how trees communicate with one another and plants. And I see a lot of these themes in the work at the museum right now. And I'm wondering if you can walk us through, for those on the call who haven't had a chance to see the exhibition, to see In Search of Chemozoa, if you can talk about how the work came about. And I know that Kat has a short teaser trailer that she'd like to play, so perhaps she can play that and you can walk us through afterwards the process of making it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Something had changed. There are a great many uncanny sounds below the water's surface. And now, among them, a new chorus.
So I think one vision of the future is that everybody will get cancer at some point in their lives, but you'll just live with it. And so it'll just be a normal part of a stage of life.
Angelo has managed to cultivate some amazing organisms in the lab. They're simple multicellularity. They don't have as many tissues as we do.
How has nature discovered ways of preventing cancer, and then can we translate that into doing better cancer prevention in humans?
Why these animals, they are not developing cancer, and they have something that we don't know.
The pale song of a languid sea. A song made of a million frail voices united in a search.
So yeah, I mean, that kind of summarizes it quite well, that teaser. But we started working with the Arizona Cancer and Evolution Center back in 2018. So it's been quite a long collaboration. And we were in residence there. And that's when we met Dr. Angelo Fortunato, who is a scientist based at the center, but he's looking at new model organisms. And yeah, we visited his lab and we were just in awe of all the tanks he had and everything he had in the tanks.
I think Angelo, certainly he's one of those scientists that kind of fits that kind of description of someone that they're working in the discipline of science, and they're trained, they're professionals, but he has an emotional connection with the world and the kind of the material, the subject that he's working with, and his interest in those beings, that he's working out how to keep them and how to use them, exploit them in a kind of scientific context, but it's part of a kind of an inner, a very kind of a deep connection to understanding the world that relates more to a kind of, I think, an artistic way of trying to understand the world, where there's a real kind of breadth to the way that he thinks about things. I think one of the things that we kind of learned later was that he has a kind of he has training in both ecology and biomedical context, and I think that gives him this, that he's not kind of thinking about the science in such a kind of a pinpointed, targeted way, but it has a really kind of a broader way. And when we've had some really interesting conversations with him, where his own kind of the kind of the ideas and the thoughts that would never make it into a publication, a kind of you have this complete picture of the way that someone thinks about something, that's to do with their where they grew up and the kind of their family and the landscape that they kind of grew up in, and all this richness that really kind of informs the way they think about things. And it was and the only thing that is kind of the only thing that was missed out from that was that he, as a scientist, he doesn't really have the opportunity to express that in a way that reaches an audience in the way that artists do. And I think that's what really kind of worked for us in that collaboration, that by working together, we could kind of gain from all that kind of that depth of experience and understanding, but then together find a way of kind of presenting these ideas, expressing these ideas in a language that was a non-scientific language.
So when we were in residence, he showed us this organism called a placozoa, which is the simplest multicellular organism. And we were really taken by these. I mean, they look like little specks. They're tiny in the tank. But when you look at them under a microscope, you can see all the cells that make up the organism, but also the body of that organism as well. And it was very much that we need to do a project where you have this sense of spatial depth, where you can actually see something on a cellular level, but you can also see it as an organism. And that was the start. We didn't know then that they were going to be called chemozoa, but that was the start of that collaboration in developing a fictional organism that could live in a very toxic environment. And something we've missed out as well is the reason that Angelo is looking at these model organisms is because things like the comb jellies that you saw in the video as well, they rarely get cancer.
Yes, they're all organisms where there's been no reports of cancer. So they're interesting from a scientific perspective for that reason.
So he's actually blasting the placozoa with radiation, and they have to give them very high doses before they kind of effectively die, don't they? But yeah.
Well, thank you for walking us through. I don't want to spoil anything else for anyone who hasn't seen the exhibition, but Kat has left a link in the chat for you if you'd like to reserve tickets to see the exhibition. And I should say that the exhibition was co-curated by Pamela Winfrey, the scientific research curator at the Arizona Cancer Evolution Center, and Heather Seeley-Lineberry, our curator emeritus. And we also worked with funding from the Andy Warhol Foundation to present the exhibition. And I think it's an interesting collaboration, because I don't know anywhere else in the world where something like this would happen at ASU Biodesign Institute, that these researchers are on the cutting edge of cancer research, and they've invited these artists in to not just illustrate their research, but to further their research and to really serve as collaborators with them. So I think it's a perfect illustration of how ASU really encourages transdisciplinary research and work, and the type of work that we love to encourage and present at the museum. So
yeah, they're kind of like, it's quite a high level of transdisciplinary research that goes on there, and it was really rewarding working across both labs as well, because we were working across like Carlo Meli's lab and Athena Actipis's lab as well. So we were looking at the research from a computational angle, but also from a psychological angle as well. Yeah.
So I know we're getting to the end of our time here, but I wanted to close by asking, how do you all relax and recharge during this time? What are some of the habits that you've started up during the pandemic and as you work from home, from your home studio?
That's an interesting question. The image of our chair that you posted on Instagram, we actually chose that image because it had like some of our film kit on the chair, because you asked us to send an image of our couch, and we were looking around and all the chairs have got something on.
It was probably the chair with the least things on, so we kind of realized that we haven't been doing that much relaxing. I mean, I think we have been really fortunate that we've had quite a lot of kind of new work coming in during this period. So we've kind of just taken that kind of time whilst we're locked in our houses just to really kind of throw ourselves into work and carry on kind of working our way through it. So in a sense, the work has been quite a way of diverting ourselves from everything that's going on and keeping ourselves just occupied.
I mean, this
apart
project
from your kind of like bread making, that's a
yeah, because when we first went into lockdown, which is almost a year ago now, which feels crazy to be saying, but there were certain ingredients that were really hard to get in the shops, and one of them was yeast, which is really interesting. And bread flour was selling out because it was like everyone was like, oh, I'm locked down. What can I do? Oh, I'll do some baking, you know. So everyone was going out and buying flour, and I've always wanted to make sourdough bread, but never really had the time. And so, like, because we were working more at home, it was easier to kind of do things like that. So I went, oh, right, okay, I'll start my sourdough off. And yeah, since then, I've managed to keep it up for a whole year. Yeah, and we're having homemade bread quite often, like 2 or 3 times a week, which is really
sometimes
nice.
It's kind of, you know, it's kind of incredible the way that it kind of grows and multiplies. Sometimes, you know, it's almost scary to go down into the kitchen in case it's like something from a B movie where this thing's kind of started to invade the house.
So I've been quite inventive. I make a lot of Italian breads like ciabatta and focaccia, and you know, so yeah, it's quite inventive. Yeah.
Well, I imagine all this work you've done with scientists and researchers has really helped you out and informed your ability to make the perfect sourdough.
Yeah, but like Paul said, I mean, like, we enjoy our work so much. So the project that we're working on at the moment, you know, gives us an opportunity. Like yesterday when we went out for a walk in the forest, we were actually looking for film locations because we want to kind of film really old trees. So we're looking for oak trees that are really old at the moment. And it's a nice way of mixing pleasure and work.
Yeah, we've been using it as an excuse to, you know, because we have a kind of an hour of kind of permitted exercise, but then, you know, we can also go to the forest because it's paid work. It's effectively, you know, we're allowed to do things when it's when we're officially working, so we can be officially checking out film locations.
But probably a lot of the locals think we're absolutely crazy because we've been filming at night, and one of the film shoots we wanted like really bright sweeping light, so we decided to go to this location in the forest because you could get to the trees quite close from the car park, so we could actually use the headlights of the car to kind of sweep across the forest. But I ended up like doing, well, not quite donuts, but driving in circles around this car park to get the light sweeping just at the right speed for Paul to catch it.
Actually, it didn't work. It was a complete. it didn't. Yeah.
But probably the locals think, oh, here's these 2 crazy artists out again with the film and the film kit in the middle of the night.
Well, I know Kat has some images up from your Instagram account that you wanted to quickly walk us through. We're encouraging everyone to follow the artists on Instagram as they post about their projects. So maybe you can just explain a couple of these Instagram posts for us.
So this one's actually Vicky taking all the photographs of the rock that we used in search of chemozoa. So
yeah, so we're really lucky that we was in residence at a gallery in Portsmouth in the south of England called Aspects Gallery, and they have a really nice studio space there. And we were based there for 4 months, so we could have a lot more kind of permanent setups. So the white cube that's lit up is like just a pop-up kind of tent that's really handy for taking photogrammetry, isn't it? To get like, it just diffuses the light. Yeah, so that's me taking photogrammetry of our rock.
And this was because we did a series of, whilst we was there, we were doing a series of workshops that were looking at upskilling women that hadn't really kind of had the opportunity to be kind of exposed to certain types of technology or use technology in a creative way. And this lady here was, she was a local dressmaker, and we did these workshops where we were using USB microscopes, and we built some software that kind of took the imagery from that microscope and generated sort of repeating patterns from that. And she was it was a really lovely workshop because she was so excited about the potential of this tool, and we had a lovely day kind of like creating these really quite because she really loved quite bright kind of patterned fabric and kind of materials, and she had a whale of a time. It's brilliant kind of working together to create these kind of patterns, and she got some of them kind of printed up onto fabric and made kind of use them in her
Yeah, I think
work.
it really opened up the potential of using technology with her work, because obviously she's normally very hands-on, and her medium is a sewing machine. And when we were showing her like the potential of making digital fabric, she was just like blown away, because she thought like, okay, like I can take some of my designs and I can now print my own fabric. So not only my designs will be unique, but also the fabric will be unique. And yeah, that was really inspiring for her. So it was lovely working with her. Yeah. Oh, this is Paul.
So this is an early this is chemozoa Mark 1. So this was when we were kind of working. The first job we had to do was create. I mean, it was the first time that we'd created a being effectively at the level of the cell. So we're working from the cell up. So we had to come up with a way of having cells that would multiply, and then they spread over a surface, so that as the cells divide, they kind of then spread over and form the shape of the chemozoa. So this is me kind of, I suppose, working on that, trying to.
Yeah, and it would have just been one cell type. So in the final chemozoa, there's like 4 different cell types, but in this particular earlier version, it was just one cell type.
Yeah.
So it looked a lot more regular, didn't it? Because they were all the same cells.
There was some kind of painful maths in there that it probably wasn't that kind of complicated, but it was something that
what was really nice about being
struggle with.
What was really nice about being in residence, that aspect was that people would just walk in, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Because the space was like right next to the gallery shop. And we left the doors open because that was the idea, that public just kind of walked in, so they could like ask us questions about our work in development and stuff like that, which was really nice, because then we could kind of show them things, work in progress, and then kind of get feedback on it.
Although because it was kind of this glass fronted door screen that separated this space off from the rest of the gallery. So if the door wasn't open, you did feel a little bit like as you felt a bit like you was a zoo
on display.
On display.
Don't feed the artists.
And actually during the winter it was really cold in there as well, so often we would have like a woolly hat on.
We'd have the door open to try and let some heat in.
That may be the theme of our next exhibition, artists on display. Well, I wanted to thank you both for joining us today, and I thought we might close by asking if you could share a few tips for young artists and researchers and designers who might be joining us or watching this video later on. What advice would you give them?
Oh, it's a tricky question, isn't it? But I mean, something that we always say sometimes to our students and our other artists as well, because obviously we've done consultancy, is to never fear failure. That's one of the things that we say, because like when you apply for things, it can be quite disheartening. You know, we all go through it where we get rejections. And sometimes you can, you know, have a spell where you're applying for lots of things and you get a rejection after a rejection, and it can be quite soul destroying in some ways. But we always say to people that like we've got gigs. We've been really lucky that we've managed to get art gigs from people that were on panels that we submitted our work maybe a year ago or something like that. and then someone on that panel contacts us and they say, oh, we really want to commission you for something. And that might have been the only person on that panel that absolutely loved our work. So even though we didn't get the gig, you know, there might be someone on that panel that, you know, does love our work, you know, because often they're very mixed panels, and it's only the consensus that goes with the final result.
And I think, you know, that is probably one of the biggest things that everyone has to deal with when they're working in a creative situation, or maybe it's true for any situation, that you know, feedback's really important, and you always kind of really, you know, you put a lot of weight behind the sort of responses that you get from different people in different situations, and it can be really confusing, and I think, you know, it is really hard to negotiate that space. And I think one of the things that I found myself saying to a lot of people, and it's something that I think, you know, I say to other people because I say it to myself, is that it's really important that you're the first and the final judge of your own work. That, you know, the space between those two is really, really confusing, and you have to take all of those responses and find a way of making sense of them. But before you enter that, and once you've kind of been exposed to that, you have to have that own kind of inner confidence and that own inner kind of truth about what it is that you're doing. And in order for that to happen, you have to be that kind of first and final judge. So that would be I think what the key thing that I would.
And another tip,
say,
which I've just thought about, was no one likes difficult artists. So always be nice, because you never know when that person might be able, like say for a curator or whatever, might give you a reference, or, you know, we've been in difficult situations where, you know, like problematic situations where something we haven't really, you know, felt comfortable with, you know, for example, I won't say what venue it was, but one installation, they decided to put up their lighting rig after we had installed the work. And it was just like, why would you do that? You know, like,
it was chaos.
It was chaos. You know, the electricians were in there, and like all the dust was coming down. And we said very nicely to the curator, can you take our work down, or can you cover it with plastic, because this is not good, you know? And we were very, very nice about the situation. And I did walk away and I thought, you know, really, I should have been really angry, and I should have told them that this is not on, and shouted and been nasty about it. But we didn't, did we? And then, like, I think they gave us a reference or something, that curator, or another gig came out of that curator, which was really good. And then I was like kind of relieved, because I thought, oh, I could have been really mean to that curator.
Well, I appreciate that one in particular as a curator. It's been really lovely working with you both. So I hope that we didn't have any situations where you wanted to be angry.
No, not at all. But I would definitely recommend with younger artists, you know, like some artists are like, oh, I've got to be really particular, and I have to be really stubborn about this. And like, you know, when you start talking to curators, you actually say, like recently another curator said, I don't want to work with that artist because they're really difficult. And you realize that actually no one wants to work with difficult artists. So you might as well be nice all the time.
I think that's a great place for us to end. Just everyone be kind to everyone else. This has been lovely. Thank you, Paul and Vicky, for joining us today and for staying up in the UK and having a cup of tea with us. And thanks all for joining. We'll be posting this on our YouTube for everyone to share. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful Sunday. And I hope you get to see the exhibition soon. It's on until April 24th at the museum.
Great.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Just going to quick look at the chat.